what's fascinating is I went back and I looked. So, for the political scientists out there, George Kennan was kind of an architect and diplomat, if you would, of all of this going on during the Cold War, and helped to negotiate the wall coming down. So there was a piece in 1998 written by none other than Tom Friedman, who I don't know as he would actually say some of these things today, but he actually was pretty harsh on some of the efforts to encroach upon Russia's border back then. And he quotes George Kennan. This is absolutely fascinating. I want to share this with you. So first of all, the article, really great. I mean, 1998, New York Times, one of the best quotes in there is when Kennan says, and he's like 90 some odd years old at this point. He's talking to Tom Friedman on the phone. He said, I think it would be the beginning of a new Cold War. He's talking about if we were to move, right, more aggressively with NATO to protect some of those other countries like Ukraine. I think it would be the beginning of a new Cold War. I think the Russians will gradually react quite adversely and it will affect their policies. What do you think's going on right now? He goes on, I think it is a tragic mistake. It shows so little understanding of Russian history and Soviet history. Of course, there is going to be a bad reaction from Russia. So George Kennan started in the State Department in the late 1920s, all right? That just gives you some perspective of his depth of knowledge, and this was sort of his expertise, Eastern Europe. Let's quote a little bit more from this article because, again, it's pretty amazing to see. By the way, the title of it, for those that are interested, it's called Foreign Affairs, Now a Word from X. May 2nd, 1998, by Tom Friedman, an interview with George Kennan. Just amazing, right? And it's funny because it's X, and X is now on Twitter, et cetera. I got to tweet some of these things out on X. It goes on here with Kennan telling Friedman, and Russia's democracy is as far advanced, if not farther, as any of these countries we've just signed up to defend from Russia. He's talking about all those Eastern Bloc countries, right? He's like, wait a second, we're signing up to defend all these guys, and that's going to really irritate Russia. This is said by a guy, as I said, the late 1920s. He joined the State Department in 1926. He was U.S. ambassador to Moscow in 1952, so height of the Cold War. He goes on to say, it shows so little understanding of Russian history and Soviet history. Of course, there is going to be a bad reaction from Russia. And then the NATO expanders will say that we always told you that is how the Russians are. But this is just wrong. Think about that, guys. Think about that. That's exactly what they're doing right now. They're saying, well, Putin was always like this. Putin was always expansionist. And this is what Kennan is predicting in 1998 when he sees that NATO is trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the article continues. He writes, well, Tom actually quotes him. Let me share what Tom actually writes. He writes, one only wonders what future historians will say. If we are lucky, they will say that NATO's expansion to Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic simply didn't matter because the vacuum it was supposed to have filled already had been filled. Only the Clinton team couldn't see it. This is Bill Clinton, right? They will say that the forces of globalization integrating Europe, coupled with the new arms control agreements, proved to be so powerful that Russia, despite NATO expansion, moved ahead with democratization and westernization and was gradually drawn into the loosely unified Europe. If we are unlucky, they will say, as Mr. George Kennan predicts, that the NATO expansion set up a situation in which NATO now has to either expand all the way to Russia's border, triggering a new Cold War, or stop expanding after these three new countries and create a new dividing line through Europe. So here it all is in 1998 with George Kennan, who'd been in the State Department from he must have been pretty young back then, 1926. He's 94 years old. He's speaking to the New York Times columnist, Tom Friedman. And it's just really amazing. He's predicting the new Cold War and then predicting something even worse. Let's continue on. He writes, Tom Friedman does, but there is one thing future historians will surely remark upon, and that is the utter poverty of imagination that characterized U.S. foreign policy in the late 1990s. They will note that one of the seminal events in this century took place between 89 and 1992, 1989 and 1992, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, which had the capability, imperial intentions, and ideology to truly threaten the entire free world. Thanks to Western resolve and the courage of Russian Democrats, that Soviet empire collapsed without a shot, spawning a democratic Russia, setting free the former Soviet republics, and leading to unprecedented arms control agreements with the US. And what was America's response? It was to expand the NATO Cold War alliance against Russia and bring it closer to Russia's borders. What? Because we couldn't live without a Cold War? Do we just have to have that? Because, hey, that's a lot of money, a lot of ka-ching going back and forth. When you have something like the Cold War, what are you going to do? Like the bottom falls out from under, right? All those, I'm just saying it's very interesting because they're trying to tell you right now that no, this was never, ever, ever, ever promised. In fact, if you do a Google search, as I did, and you try and figure out, did we, the United States, promise Russia that we would not encroach with NATO on its borders? Something which I can remember like learning about in real time. and now it's like they gaslight you because when you go and search it on the internet, Harvard comes up, Brookings comes up, these fact checks come up. They're like, no, we never promised this. So I said, all right, I'm going back to the primary sources. Yeah, it looks like we did promise this. And not only did we promise this, you've got the architect of so much that was happening during this time, right? Who was actually the ambassador to Moscow during the Cold War saying, if you expand NATO, you are going to have a humongous problem. And that's exactly what we have right now. I mean, this is great. Friedman's pretty harsh. He writes, what was America's response? It was to expand the NATO Cold War alliance against Russia and bring it closer to Russia's borders. Yes, tell your children and your children's children that if you lived in the age of Bill Clinton and William Cohen and the age of Madeleine Albright and Sandy Berger, the age of Trent Lott and Joe Lieberman, and you were too present at the creation of the post-Cold War order, when these foreign policy titans put their heads together and produced a mouse. We are in the age of midgets, he writes. The only good news is that we got here in one piece because there was another age, one of great statesmen who had both imagination and courage, which clearly we don't have right now. And we're trying to sort of rewrite history in the process. And you say to yourself, why? Why? Is it that important that we just have an enemy, a foe out there to keep the whole spigot going and operational? You wonder. I mean, here's Putin trying. He doesn't plead his case very well, which, by the way, Tucker totally admits to. He's like, I kind of expected him to be a little bit more forthcoming and lay it out. He did lay out a lot of history, like 800 years worth of history, but it's clear he really feels as though those territories should be Russian. He does feel as though his borders were encroached upon. And if you listen to what actually was going down at the time, it certainly seems that way. But let's listen to Putin.
At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened. Okay.
Were you sincere?
It's impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was...
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
If he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners.
But apparently there was no sincere wish. There really wasn't, because there were a lot of other forces at play. And this is, when we start getting worried about the system that exists, the system that is already in place, and you just elect somebody who kind of comes in as a figurehead every 4 years, well, that's what Americans start to worry about. Look, I'm just going to tell you, there was definitely some kind of, it may not have been in writing, but there was some kind of consensus and agreement that we were not going to move forward towards Russia's borders. And for whatever reason, we decided that no, we needed to have more and more of these former European, Eastern European countries in NATO, and we were going to defend them, but defend them against what exactly? And that's what you kind of need to get at, because, hey, I mean, here he is saying he would have joined with the supposed foes. Putin would have joined NATO. I mean, well then what do you got going on, right? Then what does NATO exist for, so to speak? So they for whatever reason, have encouraged this tension. And now that somebody is on the journalist stage trying to diffuse some of this tension, I don't know, is Tucker's necessarily trying per se to diffuse it, but he's at least trying to get some of the information out, because Putin is saying effectively that he would be willing under certain circumstances to end this war right now. And Tucker's getting that message out, but everybody's really, really angry about it. I mean, I look at it, I've told you guys this before, as a journalist and say, but we need more information. We need all the information we can get. If he's going to sit down for 2 hours with Vladimir Putin, I'll take it. I know that Vlad's got his spin. I know that Joe's got his spin. I know Trump's got his spin. I know everybody has their spin, right? Like, we're all adults here. We can digest it, understanding the narrative that they're trying to pitch. But the idea that you're going to somehow hold that narrative from us, well, then I consider that pretty problematic. Highly, highly problematic.